this is, and I'm grateful to say I didn't draw this. This is an image. I used to draw icebergs on flip charts when I was in classrooms many a time, and they never looked like an iceberg. So this is the nearest you're going to get. So this is an iceberg, and this iceberg model helps explain how we are individuals. And for today, where those biases have come from. This iceberg was first coined by the American writer Ernest Hemingway, and the theory is so named because only a small part of the iceberg is visible above water, and Hemingway's stories presented only a small part of what was actually happening. If you've ever read any of Hemingway, there is far more in the reflection piece and the what ifs and, oh, that didn't happen, or that was missing for me, that really brings this iceberg model to life. But today we're going to use it in relation to people. So if we think about this iceberg, and today's about unconscious bias, not global warming, so I'm not going down that rabbit warren today. However, if we think about, I nearly said it then, if we think about an iceberg, you can only see the smallest amount of the iceberg, and they tend to say around 10 to 20%. And this represents what you can see of a person. Beneath the surface is the majority that's hidden from view. Now that watermark, that water line on the model will rise and fall depending on how much time you spend with an individual to get to know them or a group of people. But for today, let's stick with a pure model of 10 to 20% is visible and 90 to 80% is hidden from view. So if we think about a person, what do we actually see? Well, we can see their body language, we can see their eye contact, we can see we can hear the phrases that they're using, the language, we can see their energy level, and this I was going to say how their space in a room. And I know the person that was talking before about making coffee in boardrooms, you remember when you could feel someone's physical presence, which hasn't been as easy as late as we've all been working remotely. But all of those things create the behaviours and actions, and we know the behaviours and actions because they're a fact. They are there. Anything that you add to, so I'm wearing a white jumper today, and we had a long conversation when we were putting this webinar together because I knew that the colour scheme was going to be orange and I didn't want to wear anything that clashed. But I'm wearing a white top today, so that's my appearance, and that is the fact. If you then add an extra bit to that sentence, you say, Sam's wearing a white jumper today, it's a bit casual. That bit casual thing is beneath the surface. That is your own story. It is nothing to do with me. The fact is I'm wearing a white jumper. So those are the things above the surface. So let's move below the surface. What is hidden from view? What do you not know just by looking at somebody? And these 4 topics here really sum that up. So you've got a person's thoughts. Now, working in my business as a coach, we work really hard on looking for non-verbal signals, but non-verbal signals does not make you a mind reader. You really don't know what's going on in somebody's thoughts and what they're actually thinking. You can call out the change in somebody's body language, but you can't mind read. I'd love to, because I'd be a millionaire and I'd be living in Barbados, but I'm not. The next bit is the beliefs. Those beliefs that are in there, where do they come from? Do they come from those fireside chats with grandparents? Do they come from the dining table when they were a child with their parents? Do they come from the playground activities? Do they come from that phenomenal teacher or that not so good teacher in education? Those beliefs really summarize what we believe we can and can't do. The next bit is our values. Where do those values come from? What is important to you? What has been hardwired into you that you hold true and safe? And all of those things make up our story, our identity, who we think we are, who we believe we are. Now, the key to this model is everything beneath that surface will drive what we see above the surface. So all of that story, all of those thoughts, all of those beliefs, all of those values will drive what we see. Now, keep making notes in your workbook. There's an activity 2 there for you to start to think about. But if all these things are beneath the surface, that's absolutely great. And it's what makes us individuals. That's why no 2 people are the same, because even if you have a set of twins that are born within minutes of each other, by the time they get to 16, 18 years old, even though they can look identical, they are still individuals as people, because they will have still had different experiences. One went to the shop one day, and on the way to the shops that they saw a car accident. That is going to create a belief or a value beneath the surface. The other twin didn't observe that, and therefore they don't have that stimulus in their story. So we are all individuals, and that creates our own story and our own personality, and therefore they're never going to be the same as another person. But also, this part of the iceberg beneath the surface will create, and it's where our unconscious bias sits. And all of those themes that have gone on beneath the surface will create those biases. So what would be great now, Robin, just take a minute while people are taking some notes. If any of you would like to share things that have come up for you while you've heard me talk through the iceberg model, that would be really helpful. Are you there, Robin?
I am listening away. Let's see if anything's come through. I think everybody's reflecting.
Yes. While you are reflecting and you're taking some notes, it's important to know that those things beneath the surface do not need to be fixed. They are there for now. And weirdly, it's a bit like having a shopping trolley and going into, and already I'm starting thinking about distancing. Imagine it's just a supermarket and you go in there and it's a supermarket of life experiences. And as you wander around with your trolley, you put experiences in and you start to do your learning. And sometimes it becomes full, so you start to take some out. All of these things that are beneath the surface of your iceberg are absolutely in your ability to reframe and rethink and reset, as long as you take a step back and be curious about where they've come from and if they're still of value to you.
I do have some answers that are coming through.
Great.
So we have one person. It's easy to judge when you don't know their backstory and why they behave as they do. Oh, lots more. Someone's commented the white jumper example is very interesting. They've always had a feeling that a suit is appropriate for a customer business meeting. If people turn up without it, it makes me think whether they are serious about the meeting. Must be a bias there.
And there's a number of things going on with that bias. If we go back to the 9 examples I shared, there's a bit of conformity going on. There's a bit of beauty bias going on. There are 2 ways to approach something like that: curiosity and compassion. I'm going to share with you actually a story where I did exactly that with a client on a call in very early stages of lockdown last year. So I will share a story on that. Really good. Anything else, Robin?
Yeah. Someone says that I think people sometimes recognize their bias and then adjust in how they behave. So they see what is beneath and action with what is above, which is a great way. We have got more things. People are very engaged in the session, which is great to see. Oh, somebody's referenced a book here. David Foster Wallace talks about this brilliantly in This Is Water. Don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, keep sharing. I love it when people share stuff like that. Keep going. Yeah, because otherwise I'd sit here sounding like a library reference. So please do share those things. That is brilliant.
Should we do one more?
Yeah, one more would be great before I move into the next section.
Right. We'll end with values is a big one at the moment, especially as most people's circle of influence has got smaller since COVID.
It is. It is. I'm kind of reading between the lines here, so please jump on the Q&A later if I'm going off tangent here. But I think a lot of people, certainly in my client base over the last 12 months, have really started to question what is important to them and what their values actually are. You know, some people are kicking and screaming about being at home with their children or with their partner all day, and it's put extra strain on relationships. For others, they have absolutely embraced it and have started to realise how much they may have missed out on by working. You know, we say full time, but we all know that those days are 12, 13, 14 hours, and our energy levels when we get home to our families were drained. You know, I've been there. I did it for 11, 12 years, and then 8 years before that with another employer. And it's interesting that this is a really great time to positively look at what is important to you. What is it that you want in your life? The moment you have work-life balance, it's already out of balance. It's just your life balance. Work forms part of your life. So really important to think about your values and take a step back and think about, you know what, as we emerge from this into the next normal, it's not the new normal, the next normal, who are you and who do you want to take into that space? Wonderful, thank you, Robin. So we're going to go on to how do you notice it in yourself? And you are all seeming superly self-aware, but I want to help you with that a little bit more. So thinking about the iceberg, we all have biases, don't worry about it. And again, running behind some of those biases will just be, well, they'll be the ones that we've been given, stay away from this, don't do that, the things that our parents probably put in there. And my mum was a Northern matriarch, I've got quite a few running on, but I'm aware of them. And then we've got ones that we've had because we've had our fingers burnt. So maybe you've had feedback in the past that's created this sense of, and it's not what the contributor shared before, but the piece around, you know, wearing a suit, or where, you know, I worked for a high street retailer back in the late 90s, and I was told, you know, they provided me with a uniform, but I was told I had to wear heels and I had to wear a certain shade of lipstick. And I kind of wonder if that added to my value in my customer service role. So there are a number of things going on there. This is about sensing the ones that make you question. So we've been exposed to all of those opinions throughout our lives, and they've created a narrative in our subconscious. So thinking about our recent need to move from physical meetings to online, and it's given us a unique insight into how people live, the homes that they live in. And I've been guilty of that a few times, where somebody I really admire, and that we moved to virtual meetings and they do keynotes for me with the British Retail Consortium, and I was absolutely doing backflips that we were going to see inside the four walls of their home. But anyway, so it's important here to take that. This is a good way of looking at those values and what you've noticed. So thinking about when you first started having those virtual meetings, you know, you first started meeting maybe with your manager or your boss or your peers, you know, and when you work with them in a physical environment, you will have created subconsciously a story about how you imagine they live, because over water cooler moments or on coffee breaks, they'll have talked about things outside of work when you've been having a chat and you've just been having a bit of a decompress session. Then the reality came true, and then you started to see behind the closed doors. Think about it for a moment and think about those biases that I shared earlier. What did you notice about the opinions that were coming up for you? What was the narrative that you were running? What were the judgments you were making? And what did you do to your environment to try and influence other people? Did you put anything in the background? Did you think about where you were sitting? Robin and I were talking earlier about buying right lighting for webinars. Did you think about your setup? What were those judgments that you were making? I'm going to share with you a story here that I promised to do that links to something that one of the contributors shared earlier. So in late spring last year, I was curating an online event for the British Retail Consortium. And as part of the offer, we were inviting industry speakers and senior leaders to provide their service as keynote speakers. One such individual was a well-known keynote speaker and had published a number of books, and we were really excited that they'd agreed to be part of the programme. A Zoom call was arranged to brief the speaker, and when they joined the call, they were sat in an unmade bed in a rather tired t-shirt and short shorts, and I felt an immediate reaction. It was, you know, they could have made an effort. How unprofessional. Can we trust them to do a good job when we go live? My unconscious bias alarm bells were ringing. The reality of this situation was that their children were being homeschooled in the main part of the house. They'd just repaired a leaking tap, hence the clothes, and they hadn't had time to tidy the bedroom before the call, but didn't want to cancel and inconvenience us. So the key is to interrupt your bias stories. So when you feel those alarm bells ringing, it's a moment to step back and go, is there another way of looking at this? Is there another way to see what's going on? Is there a question that I could ask here, but it would help me really see what's going on, rather than sticking with my alarm bells ringing and my unconscious bias leading my thoughts. Your alarm bells are your body's early warning sign that something doesn't feel right. You can feel it in your gut. I sometimes get it in my jaw where I kind of go like this. Your shoulders might hunch up, or you might take a deep intake of breath. Now, this is the exciting bit. So if we in old school, so when I originally started to work with IGD, I was going to do some wonderful masterclasses in a huge auditorium, where we do 3 around the UK, and I was going to get to walk out into the audience with a microphone and chat and meet people and see faces. But as we are right now, that's not possible. But I'd like to offer the opportunity now for somebody to come on and talk to me, and I'd like to walk through the set of questions that are in your journal that you can see on your screen now about what rings your alarm bells, what has come up for you. And if anybody is feeling brave or just fancies a chat with somebody else rather than the people in their house or the people that they chat with every day on Teams or Zoom, and would like to walk this activity through with me, I'd be really grateful. So if you would like to, if you raise your hand now, Robin will unmute you and we will have a chat for 5 minutes.
Okay, Kate Buckingham, I'm going to unmute you now and you'll be able to speak to Sam. Thank you for volunteering. You're unmuted. Oh,
Hi, Kate.
There we go.
Hello, Kate. That sounds like a great accent. Where are you from?
From Leeds, so
Come on, Leeds.
proper northern, probably triggering some unconscious biases right now.
So, well, it is, because I'm from the other side of the Pennines, so let's just leave it there, shall we?
Yeah, let's leave it as is.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. So I'm not going to keep you too long, but it's just really lovely, rather than me just talking and talking and talking, to have somebody to interact with.
Sure.
So how have you found the content so far? Is it landing with you?
Yeah, it really is. It's definitely, like, I think I thought unconscious bias was maybe just around gender and things like the kind of like really tangible stuff that was really obvious, but I think the circle that you gave with the other elements was really made me think about how I look at stuff as well, particularly around contrast, kind of comparison, that I often do look at people and compare them against other people rather than against the task that they've been given. So that was really useful. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's so good. Do you know what? In this current environment, it's just so lovely to get some live response. So I'm really pleased. So let's have a look at these questions. So the
Sure.
alarm bells are that gut reaction piece, that piece where you go, and I'm hearing that some of that's already resonated with you. So Kate, are you happy to share just a couple of examples of what rings your alarm bells?
Yeah, I think definitely what you said about people's locations on Zoom and what they're wearing. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I have got scruffier and scruffier as the lockdowns have progressed. But I think definitely at the start, I was kind of quite nosy about where people lived, and my expectation versus the reality was quite different. And I think, yeah, I often feel it like quite physically in my body, like, you know, like your chest gets a little bit tight or like a little bit kind of anxious, and you kind of clench your shoulders and your jaw a little bit. Yeah, a lot of the expectation of I thought people would appear more professional than they necessarily were. And I think your story about thinking about what they're doing at home, that they've probably got 2 kids at the homeschooling that are being a pain in the arse in the background, because I don't have children, I just have a puppy. So, you know, I think that was really an interesting question it raised with me about why I feel that people should be on it 100% on every single call when we've all got a lot going on.
It's so important, isn't it? And I was speaking to somebody who's quite senior in Harrods, and they've just rebranded everything about just come and be human. And
Yeah.
I think that makes such a difference. It just takes that extra bit of pressure off, doesn't it? If you feel you've been given permission just to be you, it's not a reflection on how you get. It's just like the judgment I made. It's not a judgment of how well you can do your job or anything else. You're just being yourself. And the whole of you
that's such a
in your
nice phrase to kind of put into business. Yeah.
And Thinking about your I&D experiences, Kate, so thinking about this in your working environment, is there anything else that's made your alarm bells ring? And I suppose we had those 9 big bits and there's that safety bit that I talked about. Is there anything else that's come up for you?
Yeah, I am a salesperson, but I also am like one of the leads for I&D across the group that I work in, which was a result of Black Lives Matter. But because it's an international group, we've had quite a lot of resistance from different countries, and like an what I would describe as an interesting approach to D&I. So, one of the German arms of our company, for example, they felt that women weren't confident enough to speak up in meetings. So instead of addressing like the cultural reasons why they might not be able to speak up, they gave them confidence training, basically, instead of like maybe thinking, well, maybe they don't feel comfortable in that environment to share their opinion. And I felt for me that was really quite triggering because, and there's a whole other backstory to this as well, but I did have that bias of, oh, well, I kind of get it because they're German and they're like much more like their approach is really different. I know that's awful to say, and I'm honestly like not a xenophobic person, but like it just, my first thought was instantly like, oh, well, of course they've done that. And of course they're resistant to diversity and inclusivity. And I don't actually think that is the reality, but I still haven't really worked through that myself. I'm not really sure why I think that.
And again, I mean, we only have to go through, I mean, being British, all of those subconscious triggers that have gone in through my childhood, you know, and I'm not going to give my age away, and I'm certainly not going to ask you yours, but if you think about the attitude in the UK sometimes towards, and it's done in a comedic way sometimes, but the characteristics of some nations, it's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not, you've not made a conscious choice to think that way. There is something going on from the stories that you've been told. All of these are stories. This is like the biggest Grimm's fairy tale almost, how unconscious bias is created, because there are all these stories that we've heard throughout our, you know, you think about that 80-90%, there's a lot going on there in the iceberg. So it is important to, there's 2 ways of dealing with it actually. One, be curious about yourself and just think, where on earth have I got, what have I actually experienced? Not what I've been told, what have I actually experienced that's got me to this opinion? And if it's nothing, then it's like, okay, I'm just going to let it go and I'm going to work with what I've got. And then you can work into the stage that you know, if you're in sales, you're great at negotiating and listening and watching for those, what we call the fertile void in language, where you're looking for that in. It's, well, what are they looking for? And what would they need to see in order to change that opinion? Then you know what you need to do.
Yeah, so that's really good advice. Thank you. That's good to work out. I feel a bit ashamed admitting that.
Please don't. And I am ultimately grateful. Link me in later and we can have a proper chat. I want to say thank you. But
Sure.
I'm really grateful for you for putting your head above the parapet and jumping on. And don't feel ashamed. The first sign of it is pride, because what you're actually doing is going, you know what, I'm going to look at this in bigger detail. And if it's no use to me, I'm just going to let it go and make space for something else.
Thank you. That's really useful. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Bye-bye. Okay, so Kate's now got my halo bias, joking, but thank you very much, Kate, for jumping on. So what I want to do now, before I do leave some time for some further questions, is just to help you think about what happens if you are to experience bias. So if bias, you are in an environment where you feel that you are, a bias has been run that has left you in a situation that you don't want to be in. So it's about acceptance versus acceptable. So have you been on the receiving end of somebody else's unconscious bias? And do make some notes about this so you can reflect on them later, about thinking about what you would do differently in the future. It's tough, isn't it, when you've been there? I do remember a final interview in an organisation, and I thought I'd done really well. I'd gone through the interview. I found it really thought-provoking, and then when I finally had a coffee with the CEO, one of the first questions that I was asked is what university I attended. And when I shared which university, which I'm not ashamed of, it was the University of Central Lancashire in Preston. But when I shared that, there was an immediate reaction from the CEO around, oh, okay, well, you know, you've made up for that kind of opinion. And it really took the wind out of my sails at the time because of that bias about, you know, Ivy League university mindset. So I'd like to offer you now something that can help you cope if it's happened or if it happens in the future. So acceptance. So acknowledge that it has happened. It's unconscious, remember. So it may be that the person was completely unaware that they've done it. And you're not Doctor Who, so you can't travel back in time and turn the clock back. The options that you have, much like Kate and I were just discussing, are in the present and the here and now. And acceptable, it doesn't mean it was okay, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take some form of action. The most important thing is to take the emotion out of it and deal with the facts. Watch your own mind story dramas running alongside. Is it something that you've made up? Are two unconscious biases clashing? But don't let those misinterpret it, what has actually happened. Think about the iceberg. Two people will not see the same thing. Take positive action. It's important that you do, so it doesn't lead to resentment, because as Buddha says, resentment is like taking poison and hoping it will hurt the other person or the situation you're blaming. We regret the things that we don't do, and then think about the things we should have done in the future, and that actually is the story that we carry. Oh, I really wish I'd done, I really wish I'd done. It takes up too much space. You've got enough things to do and more positive things that you can do, and so think about what you want to do or let it go. And remember, you can't control the circumstances, but we can choose how we're going to respond. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So what positive actions could you take? Kate and I already shared a few examples of that, but it would be interesting for you to think now about what are those things that you have running, what sets off your alarm bells, what are those stories that you run, what have you experienced, and what are the facts that sit behind that? And what are those positive things that you could do to move forward?